Picture this, four guys with more makeup than money released their debut album, and it's completely dead on arrival. Hated by critics, ignored by radio, this is the wild story of how Poison's Look What the Cat Dragged In clawed its way out of the bargain bin to become a multi-platinum monster. It all started with a band from Mechanicsburg, Pennsylvania, who, despite having a massive ambition, didn't have two nickels to rub together. They were neon-drenched, hair-sprayed, lipstick-smearing gang of rock and roll dreamers convinced that the road to stardom was a literal road leading straight to Los Angeles. So they sold what little they had, they piled up into a beat-up ambulance and an old Chevette, and chased a dream that was, by all accounts, completely insane. The album they'd eventually make was recorded for pocket change, written off as a joke, and then against all odds, it took over the world. This is the story of a glorious, glorified demo that became the soundtrack to a million Saturday nights. Before we get started with today's video, if you guys want to support my channel, be sure to hit the like and subscribe button. And I've been told from a lot of my subscribers that they find themselves unsubscribed from my channel, or they don't see my new videos pop up, so make sure you turn on all notifications. Long before the Sunset Strip, the arenas, and the tour buses, there was just Mechanicsburg, Pennsylvania. This is where singer Bret Michaels, drummer Rikki Rockett, and bassist Dall first cooked up a band with a hunger that was way too big for their small town. Rikki Rockett met frontman Bret Michaels through another musician who was a bassist named Dave. Dave was a short order cook at a place called the Amity House in Lewisburg, PA. Bret had just gotten a job there bussing tables. Rikki told Dave, "Look, I don't know what this guy sounds like, but he's got his own PA. We'll figure out how to make him sound good if he doesn't." They soon rounded out their lineup with bassist Dall and a guitarist named Matt Smith, who they found from putting an ad in a local paper that read, "Guitarist wanted for a theatrical band has to be willing to move to LA." Calling themselves Paris before they later renamed themselves Poison, they started out as a cover band fueled by the sounds of Kiss, Aerosmith, Motley Crue, and Sweet. Bands who knew that rock and roll wasn't just about music, it was about the show. And these guys wanted to put on a spectacle. They already had the look down, a full-blown explosion of color and androgyny that was way ahead of the curve. It helped that their bassist Dall was a licensed cosmetologist, a secret weapon that made sure the hair was always higher and the makeup sharper than any other local band. They looked like stars, but let's face it, Pennsylvania wasn't LA. The local bars just wanted bands that could help sell beer, not an original act that looked like it had robbed a cosmetics counter. So to counter this, they started telling club owners that they'd play new wave covers. But when they got on stage, they'd instead perform hard rock and covers of artists like Judas Priest doing songs like Screaming for Vengeance, and then they'd also perform hard rock versions of tunes like Get Ready by the Temptations. Their guitarist Matt Smith admitted in the book Nothing But a Good Time, "We realized that a lot of those classic songs referring to the Temptations were very pivotal to the bar owners who were of that age. They started to really like us for that, and we developed a good relationship with a few bars that we did play, like the Pine Grove Inn in Pine Grove, PA. The motto at the Pine Grove Inn was 'Shake your hiney at the piney.' The band sometimes played 5 sets a night, and they had to dress in the bathroom with their dressing room being a stall. In the early days, the only time Poison actually got a chance to play their original material was when they opened for the group Kix in Maryland. It was a great opportunity for the members, and it also helped that Maryland's drinking age was only 18 at the time. Kix's Brian Damage Forsyth recalled, "We would be backstage and listen to them and go, 'Man, these guys are terrible.' But they'd be getting over because we'd be doing all ages shows, like up around Scranton, PA, and little girls would just be going insane." Adding, "When they went out west, I remember our singer Steve saying, 'If these guys get signed, I'm going to quit the business and start making pizza.'" The band's dream was pretty simple. They wanted to be stars, and that wasn't going to happen in Pennsylvania. So they either had to go to Los Angeles or New York, and the choice was pretty simple. The weather and the chicks were better in LA. It was a pilgrimage that countless bands had made before, and most of them ended up as warnings, not success stories. But Poison's self-belief was on another level, bordering almost on delusional. In 1984, they took the leap. With only $800 between them, they drove across country in that rickety ambulance, a strangely perfect ride for a band that was either about to crash and burn or bring glam rock back to life. That rescue van ended up breaking down just as they crossed into California. They soon had to rent a tow bar and hook it up to Bobby's car for the rest of the way. They ended up trashing that van later on. When they got to LA, they found themselves at the very bottom of a tall, competitive ladder. Their new home was the back of a dry cleaning warehouse, a long way from the mansions that they had dreamed of. They were the only white guys in a 15 to 20 block radius at the time, and the area they lived in was filthy with cockroaches, and it was also super dangerous. Bret Michaels, who had been diagnosed with juvenile diabetes at the age of 7, was still managing his disease. Their diet mostly consisted of pizza and spaghetti, which they'd carefully ration for a week, with Bret adjusting his insulin shots to match. It was a life of pure poverty, but they were living in the heart of the rock and roll circus. One of the strangest things they noticed, though, when they got to LA was that it was pretty normal for bands to only have 1 or 2 gigs lined up per month. Meanwhile, back home, Poison was playing 2 to 3 nights a week and sometimes multiple sets a night. So to make more money and get more exposure, they went to the outskirts of Los Angeles to places like Covina to play cover tunes, and then they would come back to Hollywood and do gigs. To support themselves, like so many other musicians, they of course had part-time jobs, getting small parts in movies, and they also worked at telemarketing firms. It was a few months after arriving in the city, they hooked up with manager Vicky Hamilton, who had just come off managing Stryper. To her, the name Poison piqued her interest. Vicky was very blunt about the band's skills early on, admitting that when she first met them, they could barely play their own instruments. She went home with them one Christmas back to Pennsylvania, and they showed her tapes of when they were going by the name Paris, doing Motley Crue covers, and they were awful. She basically said, don't show these tapes to anyone. While Motley Crue was the hottest band at the time on the Sunset Strip, they were attracting their fair share of girls. So Poison got whatever was left over. According to Vicky, she admitted, with Poison, the first following was like the Fat Girls Club. There'd be lines of fat girls across the front of the stage. And then like the gay boys showed up. The band owed their female fans a lot of thanks in the early days, as these girls would bring over any kind of food and groceries that they needed. In fact, there was a running joke in the band that whenever any girl wanted to come over to the apartment they were living in, they would have the stipulation that they'd have to either clean the apartment or bring food over with them as well. Vicky soon got some investors to put up money for the group's clothes and equipment, and they soon had a monthly gig at the Troubadour. The Troubadour also paid their rent and phone bill every month. It was by 1983-84, Poison was making a name for themselves on the Strip. Couple this with their unapologetically flamboyant look, and soon the crowds started getting bigger and bigger. They were becoming the hottest unsigned act in LA, selling out venues that even national acts had trouble filling. By 85, a local LA paper named them the hottest band in town. But right when things were starting to take off, disaster struck. Their original guitarist, Matt Smith, a great guitar player who made the trip with them from Pennsylvania, decided the rock and roll life wasn't for him. His girlfriend had gotten pregnant, and the idea of a stable life back home was calling to him louder than any Marshall stack could. He quit the band, leaving a huge hole in their lineup and putting their entire future in doubt. Now, they had to find a new guitarist, someone who not only had the skills, but also fit their over-the-top theatrical image. The auditions became legendary. They auditioned something like 3 dozen guitar players, and it eventually came down to 2 guys. The first was a technically brilliant, quiet guitar player from a band called Hollywood Rose. His name was Slash. The band knew him, and they loved his playing, but something was off.
You auditioned for Poison, and that didn't come to fruition, but I was curious of how close did you come exactly?
Yeah. Well, what happened was I went down there, I played the out of the songs, but I wasn't too keen on the dress code.
Really?
And
okay.
so that was that.
So, well,
because Poison was a full-on 80s hair glam kind of thing.
Of course, people
and
mistook them for
sort
women.
Of down-to-earth, sort of as is, it's pretty much the same as I am now. And when we had this conversation about, like, I remember it was something about shoes, and I was like, huh, come again? And it just wasn't going to happen.
Then as Slash was walking out of the audition, another guitarist walked in. He was a whirlwind of pure energy from New York named CeCe DeVille. CeCe was a fan of the New York Dolls and Lou Reed, and he had grown frustrated by the rock scene in New York, so he headed out west. He showed up to the audition in pancake makeup, a mountain of hairspray, and had a brash, loud personality that just instantly clicked. Rikki Rockett later said that while they all liked Slash, CeCe just made more sense for what they were doing. Even Slash admitted that the moment he saw CeCe, he knew he was their guy. The choice was made. With CeCe DeVille on lead guitar, the classic Poison lineup was finally complete. But it was apparent from day one there were also personality conflicts between CeCe and Bret. Bret later remarked how he initially wanted Slash to join the band, but he was outvoted by Rikki and Bobby. Bret stated, CeCe came in and barely learned our songs. He started playing his own stuff. He was like, I've got these other songs. You got to hear them. We immediately butted heads. One of those early songs that CeCe brought in was Talk Dirty to Me, which was about 70% complete. By 85, the group was now named the biggest draw of the year by local magazine. With their new shredder on board, the band's live shows got even more electric. They kept selling out clubs, but the major record labels still kept their distance. The look, the attitude, it just was all too much. At one point, they signed a production deal with Atlantic Records, who ultimately passed on their demo. Producer Rick Rowdy bluntly stated about that demo, it was hideous. But one small independent label saw something. Enigma Records offered Poison a deal. But it wasn't the major label contract they'd been dreaming of, but it was a shot. Signed to Enigma at the time was Stryper and Berlin, who were having some success. The advance that Poison got was a measly $30,000, a tiny fraction of what other bands were getting. It wasn't even enough to make a record, but for a band that had been living behind a dry cleaner, it felt like $1 million. The co-founder of Enigma, a guy named Wes Hine, admitted, so we made an offer, and they wanted to be signed, but they also felt like we're going to be platinum. There was no question in their minds of how big they were going to be. This was, in their opinion, matter of fact. With their tiny record deal in hand, Poison walked into Music Grinder Studios in Hollywood with producer Rick Rowdy. The budget was so tight that the $30,000 from Enigma wasn't even enough, and the band members had to kick in their own money, borrowing from family just to get the thing done. Bret Michaels would later refer to their first album as a glorified demo, and that's pretty much what it was. The band wasn't even supposed to be in the studio at the time. Stevie Nicks had commandeered the entire studio and had it on a lockout basis. But she was going through a pretty bad drug addiction and never showed up to recording sessions. So Poison's producer paid a guy under the table $500 to let them use the studio. They had 12 days, and that was it. 12 days to capture the wild energy of their live shows on tape. The pressure was insane. The sessions were fast, frantic, and fueled by pure adrenaline. Their producer, Rick Rowdy, seemed to get the project on a cynical level, and according to one story, he brought in albums by bands like Easy Action and Hanoi Rocks, played them for the group, and basically told them to copy the feel, supposedly saying, who's gonna know? At the same time, the producer wasn't a fan of the type of music Poison was playing. In fact, Rick Rowdy was typecast as a hard rock kind of guy because he worked on a bunch of Ted Nugent albums, when in reality he was really into R&B and gospel. Rick Rowdy looked back at how he butted heads with the group, recalling, Bret wanted to be Kiss, and I thought they needed to be a lightweight bubblegum group. They didn't have the talent to be anything else. At one point, the band kicked the producer out of the studio and finished their debut album with their engineer. Rowdy ended up suing the band, and producer Michael Wagner was brought in to mix the record. Upon hearing the album, Wagner was offered either a flat fee of $5,000 or taking the option of getting points on the album. But he didn't really get Poison's music, and instead he took the $5,000 payment. He still regrets that choice to this day. The result was an album that sounded exactly like it was. It was raw, fun, and a little rough around the edges. The production is thin, a dead giveaway of the shoestring budget, but the songs themselves were pure gold. CeCe DeVille, the new guy, immediately proved his worth. His song he brought in, Talk Dirty to Me, well, it was a perfect piece of pop metal, a catchy, cheeky anthem that was practically built for the radio. The band worked around the clock, pouring all of their ambition into 10 tracks. Songs like I Want Action, the title track, Look What the Cat Dragged In, and the ballad I Won't Forget You were designed to be instant earworms. The lyrics were just a reflection of their lives, a mix of street grit, romantic fantasies, and a non-stop party attitude. Cry Tough was their own lived experience, an anthem about their struggle to make it in LA. They weren't trying to write a masterpiece, they were trying to write the ultimate party album. Rikki Rockett remarked, I think Look What the Cat Dragged In sounds inspired. We were on fire. Even if we played some of the songs maybe too fast or some of it sounded adolescent at times, I think that added to the tension and the fun of that record. That tension resulted in CeCe admitting on VH1's Behind the Music that he quit the band nearly every day over the pressure of recording the album. He'd frequently butt heads with Bret Michaels over who should be louder in the mix. But after 12 crazy days, they finally had it. It was fun, it was raunchy, and to a lot of people, it sounded cheap. But it was theirs. They finally had a record. Now they just had to figure out how to sell it. On May 23, 1986, Look What the Cat Dragged In hit the shelves with a colossal thud. Enigma, the small label who took a chance on them, only expected to get one single out of it, Cry Tough. They made a gritty, street-level music video for the song and released it in August of '86. It went absolutely nowhere. It didn't chart, it didn't get radio play, it made zero impact. The critics, well, they were even meaner. They took one look at that album cover, four dudes in full makeup with hair teased to the heavens, and they sharpened their knives. Poison was called a joke, a triumph of style over substance, and reviewers dismissed them as bubblegum metal, a gimmick band whose success on the strip was only because of their androgynous look, not their talent. One record executive, the infamous Don Arden, had even walked out of a showcase halfway through the band playing Talk Dirty to Me, claiming he didn't hear the nucleus of any hit. But Bret Michaels responded to the critics stating, "The critics looked at Poison from the day that we put out our first record praying that we would be done. The problem that you have is this. Do I go to their house? Do I smash their face in? Do I beat them over the head with a bat?" Which is inevitably what I'd really like to do. As for the album cover, Bret admitted that it was the most glam the band had ever looked in their career, and he was actually against using it, but he got overridden by his band members. The record label co-founder Wes Hine added, "I remember people in the art department kind of going, 'Oh my god, I think somebody made a comment that CeCe looked like Joan Rivers.'"
Our image is the only thing we had to show people that we were a different kind of rock band. It did shock people, you know what I'm saying? And they were saying, well, this is almost an androgynous thing. And I mean, let's face it, jeans on a girl is androgynous. I mean, where do you draw the line where androgynous becomes like to the gay side, you know? We're not a gay band, we never were a gay band. You know what I'm saying? I mean, we're a rock band, for God's sakes, you know? We're normal, we like girls.
For months, the album just sat there. It was a commercial ghost. After all the struggling, the cross-country move, and the frantic recording sessions, it looked like it was all for nothing. The album had sold somewhere in the order of 200,000 copies. The biggest unsigned band on the Sunset Strip couldn't sell a record. It seemed like every major label had been right to turn them down. For Bret, Bobby, Rikki, and CeCe, it was a brutal reality check. The dream was officially on life support, and it felt like the party was over before it even got started. But then two things happened. So Enigma had a deal with Capitol Records, where some of their artists were going to be distributed through Capitol Records' distribution system. There were two types of artists that could go through Capitol. There were ones that were 100% pure Enigma artists, or as was the case with Poison, joint venture artists. And that meant that Capitol would work the album along with Enigma. Capitol Records at the time was ready to pull the plug and move on to the next record. They told Poison that unless they got on another major tour, they would have to turn their attention to writing new songs. But if they got on a tour, Capitol would issue a second single from their first album. Luckily for Poison, they landed an opening spot with Rat, as guitarist Robin Crosby had been a cheerleader for Poison from day one. With the album dead in the water and their first single a complete flop, the band and their label decided to take one last desperate gamble. They needed a miracle, and in the 80s, miracles had a name, MTV. In February of '87, nearly 9 months after the album first came out, they released their second single, Talk Dirty to Me. This time the plan was different. They needed a video that would capture the explosive, ridiculous fun of their live shows. Directed by Doug Friel, the video for Talk Dirty to Me was simple but absolutely brilliant. It was just the band on a stage in a warehouse, surrounded by a screaming crowd. It wasn't high art, it was a party captured on film. The band's bright colors, their massive hair, and their shameless glam style basically jumped off the screen. It was a pure blast of color and noise. Rikki Rockett remembered about the video. On Talk Dirty to Me, we had half the budget that we had on the Cry Tough video, so we told the directors not to worry about continuity. If you watch it, we're constantly changing clothes and guitars. It's like, look, this is a video, so what? Let everybody know it's a video. Let's have fun with the platform. Our main thing is we want people to smile and shake their ass when they see it. And MTV ate it up. The video was immediately thrown into heavy rotation, and all of a sudden, kids in the suburbs all across America were seeing the band for the first time. They weren't just hearing a song, they were seeing a full-on spectacle. Poison's look and energy were magnetic, and they became a household name almost overnight. Talk Dirty to Me was the perfect song at the perfect time, and it shot up the Billboard Hot 100 chart, peaking at number 9. The floodgates were open. The album, once a certified flop, started selling off the shelves. Poison, who had been touring relentlessly as the opening act for groups like Rat and Cinderella, were now playing to massive crowds who knew every single word to their new hit. They weren't just an opening act anymore for a lot of people. They were the reason to buy a ticket. Enigma and Capitol Records scrambled to keep up. They released I Want Action as the third single, and it became another hit, peaking at number 50 on the Hot 100 chart. Then came the ballad I Won't Forget You, which proved they could do a lot more than write party rock anthems. That song peaked at number 13. Each single came with another video that got heavy rotation on MTV, keeping the band's outrageous look front and center. The album that was declared dead on arrival was now an unstoppable monster. The rise of Look What the Cat Dragged In was slow then steady, and then suddenly it was a rocket ship. For months it had been a ghost on the charts, but thanks to MTV and the band's nonstop touring, it started to climb. Week after week, it sold more copies, itching its way up the Billboard 200 chart. The same critics who had written them off as a joke had to watch as this glorified demo became the biggest rock album in the country. And then came the perfect ending to their underdog story. On May 23, 1987, exactly 1 year to the day after it was released, Look What the Cat Dragged In hit its peak position. It landed at number 3 on the Billboard 200, a jaw-dropping achievement for a debut album from an unknown band on an independent label. It took a full year of grinding, but they'd finally undeniably made it. The album went on to be certified 3 times platinum, selling over 4 million copies worldwide. It became the biggest selling album in Enigma Records history, the same label that signed them for pennies because no one else would. And in a beautiful twist of irony, that cheap contract they signed ended up working in their favor. Because Enigma only expected to sell a few thousand copies, they gave the band a superstar royalty rate and let them keep their publishing rights. When the album exploded, the guys who were once rationing pizza slices were suddenly making serious money. Look What the Cat Dragged In didn't just make Poison famous, it helped define the entire look of the late 80s hair metal. Their image, which had been mocked by critics, was now being copied by bands all over the country. They had taken glam to its most extreme and colorful conclusion, and they were rewarded with massive success. The album that should have been a forgotten footnote became a cultural touchstone, a neon-colored monument to the power of hairspray, perseverance, and a ridiculously catchy chorus. So how does Rick Browdy, the producer of the album, feel about it after all these years? Well, he hasn't really changed his feelings on it, admitting it's a piece of shit album. It sucks. Sonically, as a producer, it was the worst record ever, and I became known as a garbage producer because of it. But Rikki Rockett really put things in perspective. He didn't realize how much of an impact they had with Talk Dirty to Me until he met Michael Jackson. He admitted, I only realized what we had accomplished with that video years later when I met Michael Jackson. I said, listen, I don't know if you know anything about our band, but I'm the drummer for Poison. I just want to say hi. He turns around and he goes, man, every time your video comes on, I sit down because you're having such a good time. I don't want to miss a second of it. So if some dude says, oh, you guys suck, it's like, who cares? Michael Jackson saw the value in Poison. How cool is that? That brings us to the end of today's video, guys. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you again in Rock and Roll Your Stories. Take care.